They're trying to tell you this is just another rookie quarterback story. Growing pains, learning curves, patience. That's the public version. But if you actually listen to what's being said, not by the coaches, not by the front office, but by the people on the field, a very different story starts to emerge. Because this isn't just about Shedeur Sanders playing better. It's about why everyone around him suddenly sounds relieved. In the last few days, Browns players have gone in front of microphones and, without ever naming names, revealed something they probably weren't supposed to. They didn't accuse anyone. They didn't complain. They didn't cause a scene. Instead, they did something far more dangerous. They told the truth, quietly. Words like contagious. Phrases like settling in quicker. Moments where they paused, then corrected themselves. Those aren't random compliments. In NFL locker rooms, language is currency. Players don't speak carelessly, especially about quarterbacks. When they choose certain words, it's intentional. And right now, multiple veterans are using the same language to describe Shedeur Sanders, while indirectly describing what the offense didn't have before. That's not coincidence. And then there's Shedeur himself. After putting up numbers that put him in rare company, after performances that usually lock a rookie's future in place, he said something that should have set off alarms across the entire organization. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet line slipped into an answer about an injured teammate. I'm gonna make sure I'm around next year too. Think about that for a second. Quarterbacks who feel secure don't talk like that. Franchise guys don't feel the need to say it out loud. They don't reassure themselves publicly. That sentence didn't come from confidence. It came from awareness. Awareness that no matter how well he plays, something behind the scenes still doesn't feel settled. And that's where the story shifts. If you enjoyed this breakdown and want to stay locked in on all the latest NFL drama, make sure you hit that like button. It helps the video reach more people who love this content just like you. And if you're new here, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another update, reaction, or storyline as it unfolds in real time. I also want to hear from you in the comments. What do you think about Shedeur Sanders' performance and the Browns' collapse? Drop your thoughts below and let's talk about it. And don't forget to share this video with friends who follow the NFL. Your support truly keeps the channel moving forward. Because when the quarterback coach finally spoke, he didn't defend the head coach. He didn't reinforce the official narrative. Instead, he did something far more revealing. He compared Shedeur's development to one of the greatest quarterbacks in NFL history. He emphasized work ethic over system, player determination over coaching design, and when it came time to hand out praise, one name was missing. That silence mattered. This isn't a conspiracy. It's a pattern of players sounding more confident, a pattern of veterans subtly validating what fans have been screaming for months, a pattern of a rookie quarterback earning the locker room while still fighting for organizational trust. And when the locker room and the coaching staff aren't aligned on the most important position in sports, history tells us exactly how that ends. So the question isn't whether Shedeur Sanders can play. The question is whether the Browns are ready to admit what their own players already know, and what happens if they don't. It started with a comment that sounded harmless, almost routine, the kind of thing you hear every Sunday when a lineman talks about his quarterback. But if you slow it down, if you really listen, you realize this wasn't just praise. It was a reveal. Wyatt Teller wasn't trying to start a fire. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't call anyone out. He just explained how it feels to block for Shedeur Sanders. And in doing that, he accidentally exposed everything. He talked about the scrambles, the touchdown run, the play where Shedeur took off straight up the middle and flipped field position in one snap. Teller said those plays force defenses to think differently. They make linebackers hesitate. They make pass rushers stay disciplined instead of flying off the edge. On the surface, that's football talk. But for an offensive lineman, that's code for something much bigger. It means the quarterback is helping you. When a QB can extend plays without panicking, it changes the entire protection mindset. Defensive linemen can't just hunt. They have to contain, they have to hesitate. And that hesitation is everything. It buys time. It saves bodies. It makes a long game survivable. Linemen feel that instantly, and they don't exaggerate it unless it's real. But then Teller took it further. He didn't talk about schemes. He didn't mention play calling. He didn't credit the system. He talked about confidence. He said Shedeur's confidence is contagious. That word matters. In locker rooms, players don't casually label confidence as contagious unless it's actively changing how they play. Confidence spreads or it doesn't. And according to Teller, it is. That's the moment everything shifted. Because if Shedeur's confidence is contagious now, what does that say about before? It says the offense didn't feel this way earlier in the season. It says the energy wasn't there. It says the belief wasn't shared. And Teller didn't need to name names for that message to land. Everyone knew exactly what he meant. He also mentioned consistency, that Shedeur is settling in faster each week. Again, that sounds harmless until you realize what consistency requires. Reps trust, stability, things Shedeur didn't have for most of the season. And yet, despite being thrown into the fire late, the offense feels steadier with him now than it did after months with other options. That's not normal. Offensive linemen are the last people to romanticize quarterbacks. Their job is pain. Their loyalty is earned through results. And when one of them publicly says the quarterback makes them more confident, that's as close to an endorsement as it gets. What Teller did wasn't hype. It was testimony. And once you hear it that way, it becomes impossible to ignore the implication. The Browns didn't just find a quarterback who can make plays. They found one who changes how the entire offense feels, who calms chaos, who gives the line a fighting chance. And once that's out there, once the locker room says it out loud, the story can't go back to what it was before. Because that one comment didn't just praise Shedeur Sanders. It changed the conversation around him entirely. Jerry Jeudy didn't mean to expose anything. That's what makes his comments so revealing. He wasn't emotional. He wasn't dramatic. He wasn't pushing an agenda. He was answering questions the way veteran receivers do, carefully, professionally, and without stepping on toes. But in trying to say the right thing, he ended up saying the most honest thing. When Jeudy was asked about Shedeur Sanders and the offense, he kept using the same phrase over and over again. Settling in quicker. Not once. Not twice. Multiple times. And that repetition wasn't accidental, it was instinctive. Because wide receivers feel timing before anyone else. They know when a quarterback trusts his read. They know when the ball is coming out on rhythm. They know when routes are being run with purpose instead of hope. And when Jeudy says Shedeur is settling in quicker each week, he's not just talking about comfort. He's talking about processing speed, decision-making, chemistry. That's the kind of thing you usually hear after a full offseason together, not from a rookie who barely got first-team reps. Jeudy also made another telling comment that slipped past most people. He said the team has been taking things week by week, depending on whoever's back there at quarterback. That line should stop you cold, because it admits something the organization has tried to downplay all season. There was no stability. The offense wasn't building. It was reacting. One week to the next, players didn't know who they'd be timing up with. They couldn't stack progress. They couldn't fine-tune details. They were constantly resetting. And receivers hate that more than anyone because timing isn't optional, it's survival. Then Jeudy said something even more revealing. He talked about wanting to give Shedeur the best opportunity to show what he can do in the NFL. Think about the framing of that. Not, he's shown enough. Not, he's our guy. But give him the opportunity. That implies he hasn't had one. Not a real one, not a fair one. And yet, despite that, Jeudy acknowledged that Shedeur already had them in position to tie games, already made big-time throws, already showed growth. That's the contradiction that exposes everything. If a quarterback can do that without continuity, without full preparation, without organizational commitment, what was the holdup? Jeudy also emphasized learning the speed of the game, that every start matters, that each rep builds toward the future. That standard quarterback development talk, The same talk that's been used to justify patience with other young passers around the league. But here, the problem. Shedeur wasn't given that patience. He wasn't allowed to grow on the field. He wasn't treated like a developmental investment. He was treated like a contingency plan. And Judy didn't need to criticize anyone to make that clear. By talking about rhythm, timing, and stability, by saying the offense finally has a chance to see what it can be, he revealed the truth without ever saying it outright. The offense wasn't broken before. It was constrained. And now that Shedeur Sanders is under center, even briefly, the difference is obvious to the people who depend on it most. Not analysts, not fans. The receivers running routes in real time. And once they start saying it out loud, the truth has a way of spreading. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't framed as a complaint. It didn't even sound controversial in the moment. But it was the most revealing sentence Shedeur Sanders has said all season, and it should have made everyone in Cleveland pause. I'm gonna make sure I'm around next year too. That was it, just one line, tucked into an answer about supporting a teammate through injury. Most people heard it and moved on, but quarterbacks don't talk like that unless something feels unresolved, especially not after playing the way Shedeur has. Because here's the truth. Players who feel secure don't reassure themselves publicly. They don't project into the future unless they're uncertain about it. When a quarterback believes the organization is fully behind him, his language reflects that confidence. It's forward-looking, but never defensive. This wasn't that. This sounded like someone who knows his performance alone might not be enough. And that's what makes it unsettling. Shedeur had just done what young quarterbacks are supposed to do when given a chance. He kept the offense alive. He made throws under pressure. He created with his legs when protection broke down. He put the team in position to win games that could have slipped away early. Those are the moments that usually erase doubt. But the doubt didn't disappear. It lingered. And Shedeur knows it. That sentence revealed a reality fans don't like to consider. That there may already be conversations happening behind closed doors that have nothing to do with his play. That decisions could be driven by philosophy, ego, or long-term plans that don't include him, regardless of what he puts on tape. He didn't accuse anyone. He didn't say he felt disrespected. He didn't ask for reassurance. But by stating his future out loud, he showed awareness of something most rookies are shielded from. Uncertainty. And it gets more concerning when you compare how other young quarterbacks talk after similar performances. They say they're focused on the next week. They say they trust the process. They say they're grateful for the opportunity. Shedeur did all of that and then added something extra. A line about staying. That's not accidental. It suggests he's fighting for something that should already be his. And that raises an uncomfortable question. Why? Why does a quarterback producing under chaotic circumstances still feel the need to plant a flag? Why does he sound like he's making a case instead of building on momentum? Because he knows how this league works. He knows talent doesn't always win. He knows narratives matter. He knows decisions are sometimes made before the season even ends. And he knows that no matter how well he plays, the organization might already be leaning a different direction. That's what makes the line terrifying for Cleveland. Not because Shedeur lacks confidence, but because he has too much awareness. Awareness that he's earning the locker room without fully earning the trust upstairs. Awareness that performance and opportunity aren't always linked. And once a quarterback starts thinking like that, the dynamic changes. Because now, every snap isn't just about winning. It's about survival. And when that's the case, the pressure shifts, not onto the quarterback, but onto the organization that has to decide whether it's actually watching what's happening on the field. If Shedeur Sanders' comment raised eyebrows, Bobby Musgrave's press conference should have raised alarms. Because when a quarterback coach speaks, especially in a tense situation like this, every word is calculated. Praise is intentional. Silence is even more intentional. And what Musgrave chose to say and not say told a story no official statement ever could. Musgrave didn't come out swinging. He didn't challenge anyone directly. Instead, he framed everything around the quarterbacks themselves. Their mindset, their preparation, their determination. He talked about how both QBs are grinding, staying ready, and pushing through adversity. On the surface, that sounds like standard coach speak. But then he pivoted. He started talking about development, about how Shedeur is learning the speed of the game, about how confidence builds when a quarterback is allowed to play freely, about how growth isn't linear. It happens when a player is trusted enough to make mistakes and recover from them. That's where the message shifted from neutral to pointed. Because nowhere in that explanation did Musgrave emphasize scheme. He didn't credit the system. He didn't talk about structure. He didn't highlight play design or coaching adjustments. He talked about the quarterback doing the work, the quarterback figuring it out, the quarterback driving the process. And then came the comparison. Musgrave referenced John Elway. That's not something you toss out casually. Coaches don't compare young quarterbacks to legends unless they're trying to make a point. And the point wasn't that Shedeur is Elway. It was that elite quarterbacks often need time, trust, and freedom before everything clicks. That comparison reframed the entire conversation. It wasn't about whether Shedeur fits the system. It was about whether the system is flexible enough to fit him. And that's where the silence became deafening. At no point did Musgrave publicly reinforce Kevin Stefanski's vision. He didn't say this is all part of the plan. He didn't say the staff has handled the situation perfectly. He didn't tie Shedeur's progress to coaching decisions. Instead, he separated the quarterback's growth from the organization's choices. That's not accidental. Quarterback coaches are usually the first line of defense for head coaches. They smooth things over. They align messaging. They protect the structure. Musgrave did the opposite, subtly, professionally, and without ever sounding confrontational. It felt less like a defense of the staff and more like an endorsement of the player. And that's what makes it a quiet rebellion. Because when a position coach starts highlighting individual development over collective planning, it signals disagreement without saying the word. It says, "This player is doing his part." It leaves the rest open to interpretation. And players notice that. So do front offices. So do other teams around the league. Musgrave didn't undermine authority. He didn't throw anyone under the bus. But he created separation between what the quarterback is becoming and what the organization has committed to. That gap is dangerous. Because once it's public, it forces a decision. Either the organization aligns with the quarterback's trajectory, or it doubles down on a direction that no longer matches what's happening on the field. And the longer that tension sits unresolved, the louder the silence becomes. The most frustrating part of this situation isn't the competition. It's the imbalance. Because when you look closely at how the Browns handled their quarterbacks this season, it becomes clear that the standards weren't the same, even though the expectations were. On paper, it was supposed to be an open battle. Two young quarterbacks, one job, let the best man win. That's how it was presented publicly. But what happened behind the scenes told a different story. Dillon Gabriel was given time. He was given patience. He was given the benefit of continuity. When mistakes happened, they were framed as learning moments. When the offense stalled, the explanation was development, growth, long-term investment. Every rough outing came with a built-in excuse and a promise that things would click. Shedeur Sanders didn't get that runway. His opportunities were shorter. His margin for error was thinner. Every mistake felt amplified. And instead of being positioned as a quarterback learning on the job, he was treated like a temporary solution, someone filling space until a preferred option emerged. That difference matters. Because development isn't just about talent. It's about repetition, trust, and knowing that one bad quarter won't send you back to the sideline. Gabriel had that security. Shedeur didn't. Yet somehow, Shedeur was expected to deliver immediate results in the most unstable version of the offense. And here, where it gets uncomfortable. Despite fewer reps, fewer first-team looks, and less structural commitment, Shedeur still stabilized the offense faster. Players talked about rhythm returning. about timing improving, about confidence spreading. Those aren't abstract qualities, they're measurable results. So the question becomes unavoidable. If Shedeur was producing with less support, why wasn't he given more? The answer isn't performance. The tape doesn't support that. It isn't preparation either. Teammates and coaches have repeatedly praised his work ethic. What's left is philosophy, a preference, a pre-existing plan that didn't account for what was actually happening on the field. That's where two standards emerge. One quarterback was allowed to grow into the role. The other had to justify his presence every snap. One was evaluated on potential. The other was judged on immediate impact. And that's not how you fairly assess a young quarterback. It also explains why Shedeur's comment about next year sounded the way it did. When you're constantly operating on borrowed time, you start thinking beyond the moment. You play like every snap is an audition. And while that can sharpen focus, it also exposes organizational inconsistency. Teams that truly believe in a quarterback don't hedge like this. They don't keep the door cracked open while the player is proving himself. They commit, they align, they build forward. The Browns haven't done that, not yet. Instead, they've created a situation where one quarterback was protected by patience, and the other had to earn patience before being allowed to use it. And locker rooms notice that imbalance. Players might not say it directly, but they respond to fairness. They respond to clarity. And when they see a teammate outperform expectations without receiving equal trust, support naturally follows. That's why this isn't just a quarterback debate. It's a credibility test. Because if the standards aren't the same, the results won't be either. And eventually, the organization has to answer for that. By the time debates reach the public, the locker room has usually already made up its mind. Players don't wait for press conferences or depth chart announcements to decide who they trust. They decide it in the huddle, in the film room, in moments when things fall apart and someone has to pull it back together. And in this case, that decision has already been made. You can hear it in how players talk about Shedeur Sanders without being prompted. The words come out naturally. Calm, confidence, energy, control. They don't sound like teammates trying to hype a rookie. They sound like veterans describing someone who makes their jobs easier. That's the difference. When protection breaks down, they trust him to escape without panicking. When routes take an extra second to develop, they trust the ball will still arrive on time. When the game tilts, they trust he won't fold. Those are unspoken votes, and they carry more weight than any coach's endorsement. The offensive line has felt it first. Injuries forced constant reshuffling. Communication has been tested weekly. And yet, with Shedeur under center, players have talked about the offense feeling steadier, not shakier. That's backwards from how it's supposed to work with a rookie. But it's real. Receivers have felt it too. Timing has improved. Routes are being run with conviction instead of hesitation. There's less guessing and more reacting. That only happens when the quarterback's decisions are predictable in the best way possible. And none of that comes from slogans or leadership speeches. It comes from competence. What makes this even more telling is what players aren't doing. They aren't lobbying publicly. They aren't demanding changes. They aren't drawing lines in the sand. Instead, they're speaking in a way that leaves no doubt without ever forcing a confrontation. That's intentional. Veterans understand how fragile locker room dynamics can be. They know how quickly things can turn if comments are taken the wrong way, so they choose their words carefully. They praise traits instead of titles. They describe feelings instead of decisions. But the message still lands. This is the guy they believe in. And once belief reaches that level, it becomes self-reinforcing. Players play harder. Mistakes are forgiven quicker. Energy stays up longer. The offense doesn't just function, it responds. That's why this situation is so delicate. Because the locker room has aligned around a quarterback who hasn't yet been fully embraced by the organization. And when that gap exists, pressure builds. Not in headlines, but in subtle ways. In body language, in accountability, in who speaks up during adversity. Teams can survive talent disputes. They don't survive trust disputes. And that's what this has become. Shedeur Sanders didn't demand this support. He didn't campaign for it. He earned it by how he operates when things break down. And once players feel that reliability, they rarely let go of it easily. The vote has been cast. The only question now is whether the front office and coaching staff are willing to acknowledge it, or whether they'll try to override a decision the locker room already believes is settled. Because when organizations ignore that kind of consensus, the consequences don't show up immediately. They show up over time. And by then, it's usually too late to reverse. This is where everything starts to collide. Because what's happening right now isn't sustainable. You can't have a locker room moving in one direction while the organization hesitates in another. Eventually, those paths cross, and when they do, someone has to make a choice. This offseason is that moment. The Browns will frame it as evaluation. They'll talk about roster construction, long-term planning, and competition. That's how these things always sound publicly. But behind closed doors, the conversation will be far more uncomfortable. Do you commit to what your players are responding to? Or do you commit to what you planned before the season started? Those are not the same thing. If the organization leans into Shedeur Sanders, it means acknowledging that the process changed, that the quarterback hierarchy shifted organically, that the locker room saw something the depth chart didn't. And for coaching staffs, that's a difficult admission because it implies adjustment, not control. But if they don't lean in, the message is just as loud. It says performance isn't the deciding factor. It says momentum can be ignored. It says trust from the locker room isn't enough on its own. And that's a dangerous precedent to set in a league where buy-in is everything. This is why the offseason matters more than any single game. Draft boards will be built, free agents will be discussed, trade calls will be made. And somewhere in all of that, the quarterback question will resurface, not as a competition, but as a direction. Do they bring in another option to push the room? Do they invest significant resources elsewhere and quietly reset the narrative? Or do they finally clear the fog and give Shedeur what young quarterbacks need most? Clarity. Because clarity changes everything. With it, players know who they're building around. Without it, uncertainty spreads. And uncertainty is poison for teams trying to establish identity. There's also another layer to this collision that doesn't get talked about enough. The rest of the league is watching. Other teams hear the same comments. They notice when players rally around someone. They notice when production doesn't align with opportunity. And if Cleveland hesitates too long, they may not be the only ones evaluating Shedeur's future. That's how leverage shifts quietly. And then there's the human side of it. Shedeur has already shown awareness of the situation. He knows how thin the margin is. He knows how quickly narratives can flip. If the offseason brings more uncertainty instead of resolution, it forces him into survival mode again, playing not just to win, but to protect his future. That's not where young quarterbacks thrive. The collision isn't dramatic. It's procedural. Meetings, evaluations, decisions that sound small but carry massive consequences. And once those decisions are made, there's no rewinding the message they send. This offseason will answer a simple question. Will the Browns follow the evidence in front of them, or the plan they were already committed to? Because one choice aligns the locker room and the future. The other guarantees tension. And once that collision happens, everyone will feel the impact, whether the organization is ready for it or not. When you strip away the quotes, the analysis, and the week-to-week noise, what's left is a question that refuses to go away. Not a hot take, not a debate, a question that every organization eventually has to answer honestly. Who do you believe? Because this story was never really about stats or rookie mistakes. It was about signals, subtle ones, the kind that only show up when you listen closely. Veterans choosing their words carefully. A quarterback coach praising the grind but avoiding the structure. A young quarterback hinting at uncertainty despite doing everything asked of him. And a locker room that, without ever staging a revolt, quietly made its preference known. That's not chaos, that's clarity. The Browns didn't lose control of the narrative. The narrative revealed itself. And now the organization is standing at a crossroads it didn't expect to reach this soon. On one side is comfort, plans already drawn up, decisions that don't require rethinking philosophy or admitting adjustments. That path is clean, predictable, and safe, at least on the surface. On the other side is reality, what the tape shows, what the locker room feels. What happens when a quarterback walks into a huddle and everyone exhales because things finally make sense? That path is messier. It requires alignment. It requires trust. And most of all, it requires listening not just to coaches, but to players whose careers depend on getting it right. This is why the question lingers. Because ignoring locker room consensus rarely ends well. History is full of teams that tried to override belief with structure, only to watch cohesion slip away quietly. Not in dramatic blow-ups, but in missed blocks, slight hesitation. The half-second that turns a win into a loss. And once that starts, no scheme can save it. Shedeur Sanders didn't demand this moment. He didn't force a controversy. He didn't make it public. He simply played well enough under unstable conditions that the people around him started responding differently. That's how leadership forms in the NFL. Not through announcements, but through trust. So now Cleveland has to answer the only question that matters. Do they treat what's happening as an inconvenience or as information? Because one path preserves authority. The other builds belief. And while belief doesn't guarantee success, its absence guarantees something else entirely: fracture. This isn't a prediction. It's a decision point. One that will shape not just the quarterback room, but the tone of the entire organization moving forward. The players have already answered in their own way. The question that lingers is simple. Will the Browns?
If you enjoyed today's breakdown and want to keep up with all the drama, trades, and behind-the-scenes action in the NFL, then don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps this channel grow and lets us know you love this kind of content. And hey, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with your friends, your group chats, or anyone who loves football as much as you do. The more the conversation spreads, the better it gets. Most importantly, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss when we drop fresh stories, wild rumors, or breaking updates that the mainstream media won't talk about.